You're not going to believe what happened the night I tried to humiliate faith on live TV. I was going to burn a holy Bible. As a senator, I thought I was the smartest man in the room. But someone answered back in front of the whole nation. And I think it was Jesus Christ. Before I tell you the truth, please subscribe to our channel, tap that like button, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Because this story might change how you see everything. Now, listen closely, because what I'm about to tell you is the night everything changed for me. October 20th, 2024, Washington, D.C. I was 56, a United States Senator, and that night I was scheduled to speak at a televised debate inside the Hamilton Civic Auditorium downtown. It was one of those modern halls near the mall, all glass doors and metal beams, big enough to fit nearly 1,000 people. The event was called Faith and Freedom in Modern America, and I was the headliner, the man who would, as my staff liked to put it, end the age of superstition. That phrase used to make me proud. Now it just makes me tired to remember it. I didn't start out hating faith. I started out loving a woman who believed in it more than she believed in anything else. My wife, Claire, prayed for everyone, neighbors, strangers, even me. When she got sick, I prayed too. I begged, bargained, cursed, and still watched her slip away while the doctors shook their heads. After that, I told myself that belief was nothing but comfort for the powerless. I stopped going to church. I stopped talking about heaven. I filled the hole she left with microphones, cameras, and applause, and somehow the noise felt safer than silence. Backstage smelled of burnt coffee and hairspray. Technicians moved fast, checking cables, adjusting headsets. My chief of staff, Carla, stood by the mirror holding a clipboard, repeating the schedule under her breath like a prayer she didn't mean. "We're live in 7 minutes," she said. "Stick to the script. Keep it sharp. The networks want sound bites, not sermons." "I know," I said. I had every line memorized. She gave me a quick look. "Mark, don't do anything stupid tonight." I smiled. "When have I ever?" She sighed and didn't answer. She'd been with me long enough to know that when I was nervous, I tried to provoke people. I was nervous that night. I won't lie about it. In my briefcase, tucked beside the speech cards, was Claire's old black Bible. I had taken it from her nightstand after she died, told myself it was a keepsake. But that night, I was going to burn it on live television to make a point. I know how horrible that sounds. I'm ashamed of it now. But that's the kind of man I was back then. Angry, proud, desperate to prove I couldn't be hurt anymore. Carla looked at me one last time before I went on stage. "You sure you're ready?" "Always," I said, even though my throat felt dry. When I stepped out into the lights, the heat hit like an oven door opening. Rows of seats curved around the stage, faces shining pale under the studio glare. The sign above the backdrop glowed in white letters, Faith and Freedom in Modern America. The audience looked like America itself. College kids, older couples, veterans, people in Sunday clothes and people in t-shirts. You could feel the tension even before I spoke. Half of them wanted to hear me destroy faith. The other half wanted to see me struck down for trying. The moderator smiled too wide, and when he introduced me, the applause filled the hall like thunder. I gripped the podium and leaned into the microphone. "Let's stop pretending invisible friends run this country," I said. The crowd laughed. The line always worked. If we ever hope to move forward, we've got to put away our children's storybooks and grow up. I saw Carla off stage, mouthing slow down, but I didn't. I was on a roll. "Faith divides," I said. "It keeps people weak. It teaches them to wait for miracles instead of progress." A few people crossed their arms. An older man in uniform glared straight ahead. But I couldn't stop. I wanted to humiliate them the way I'd felt humiliated in hospital chapels all those years ago, watching Claire pray while the machines beeped and the monitors screamed. "Don't look offended," I said. "Facts don't care about anyone's Sunday feelings." I remember saying that and feeling the crowd stiffen. Something in the room shifted then, like air being pulled out. The silence between my words began to feel heavier. I reached for the Bible sitting on the podium and held it up, my voice dropping into that practiced tone I used when I wanted to sound like authority. "For centuries, this book has been used to frighten and control," I said. "Maybe it's time someone showed what it's really worth." I know, It sounds cruel now. I wince remembering it. But I truly thought I was doing something brave, proving that reason could finally win against myth. My heart was pounding, my palms slick. I wasn't thinking about the crowd or the cameras or Claire's handwriting still faint inside the cover. I was thinking about winning. Someone in the crowd shouted, "Don't!" And that only made me smile wider. "Relax," I said. "I'm not afraid of your thunderbolts." I flicked the lighter. The blue flame appeared, steady and sharp. I held it under the Bible's corner. And then I heard it. A single voice, calm and firm, from somewhere in the middle rows. "Stop." It wasn't loud, but it carried through the hall like a bell. Every head turned toward the sound. A man stood up. Brown jacket, gray hair at the temples, maybe mid-50s. He didn't look angry. He just looked certain. Security started to move, but I waved them off. "No, bring him up here," I said, trying to keep the tone light for the cameras. "If he wants to defend fairy tales, let him do it face to face." The man began walking down the aisle. He moved slowly, not shy, not proud, just steady, like a man who knew where he was going. Every person he passed turned to watch him. You could have heard a coin drop in that room. When he reached the stage steps, I leaned forward. "What's your name, preacher?" "Daniel," he said. "Well, Daniel, welcome to the 21st century. We have electricity, medicine, and the internet. We don't need ghosts to hold our hands anymore." He looked straight at me, and for a second I almost forgot what I'd just said. His eyes were calm, not accusing, just seeing. "Without faith," he said quietly, "you'll use those gifts to destroy yourselves." The audience murmured. I laughed too loud. "That's the best you've got? Moral fortune cookies? Go ahead, preach. Let's see if heaven's hiring." He didn't move, didn't blink. "Don't mock what you don't understand," he said. I shot back. "I understand manipulation. I've seen churches bleed people dry while pretending to love them." He nodded slightly. "And I've seen men gain the world and lose their souls." That one hit harder than I wanted to show. My smile faltered, just for a heartbeat. I saw Carla's face in the wings, pale and worried. Then Daniel said, "You think that book is just paper? Then go ahead. Burn it." So I flicked the lighter again. Once, twice, nothing. The flames sputtered and died. I frowned and tried again. The hall was dead silent except for that tiny click of metal. Still nothing. Nervous laughter rippled from the front rows. "Cheap gas," I muttered. "Some miracle." And then every light in the building dimmed at once. Not out, just lower, softer, like the whole world had taken one long breath. People gasped. Some stood. Phones dropped. I tried to keep my voice steady. "What kind of stunt?" But Daniel said, "You lit a flame to prove control. Now see who holds it." The lighter sparked on its own, a blinding white flash, then it dropped from my hand to the stage floor. The flame went out instantly. Smoke rose straight up, curling gold in the dim light before fading. No one moved. I could feel the weight of 1,000 eyes. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt. "Coincidence," I said, my voice too high. "Technical issue. You people are gullible." But the words didn't sound like mine anymore. Daniel looked out at the audience, not at me. "Truth doesn't need defenders," he said quietly. "It only needs witnesses." The crowd stayed frozen, like everyone was afraid to breathe. Then someone in the back started to clap just once. Others joined. It wasn't applause like at a rally. It was slow, uncertain, like something sacred had happened and no one knew how to react. I slammed my hand on the podium. "Enough! This is my stage!" Daniel looked back at me and said, "It never was." And for the first time in my life, I had no idea what to say next. When the lights came back on, I remember feeling the air itself shake, not from noise, not from movement, just that strange, heavy stillness that presses down after thunder. The audience sat frozen in their seats. I could see hundreds of faces in the white glare, pale, stunned, waiting for someone to explain what they'd just seen. I didn't know what to tell them. My throat had gone dry, and for once, the great Senator Ellison, the man who always had a clever line ready, stood there with nothing but silence in his mouth. I thought the moment would pass if I kept talking. I wasn't even close, so I tried to laugh. I told them it was a technical hiccup, a malfunction, a coincidence. I heard myself say words like stagecraft and psychology, but even as I spoke, my voice betrayed me. It trembled. Somewhere behind the cameras, I heard Carla whisper, "Mark, just wrap it," but I couldn't stop. Pride has its own gravity. It keeps pulling you back toward the fire. A woman in the front row stood up. She was crying. She pointed at me and said, "You shouldn't mock God like that." I still remember her voice, cracked, trembling, but certain. And for reasons I can't explain, I looked right at her and said, "Ma'am, I'm not mocking God. I'm mocking ignorance." The line came out sharp, but hollow, like something scripted for a man I didn't want to be anymore. That's when the doors at the back of the auditorium swung open again. I know how that sounds. I know you're thinking maybe it was just some stagehand or an overzealous protester. I thought that too, until I saw who walked in. It was Daniel, the same man who'd told me to stop. He came back. Same brown jacket, same calm face, same steady walk. The crowd turned toward him like a field of wheat and wind. No one said a word. The cameras were still rolling, catching every step. "Are you kidding me?" I said into the mic. "Who let this guy back in?" He didn't answer. He just walked down the aisle toward me, hands in his pockets, like a man who had all the time in the world. Someone behind me whispered, "Let him speak." I spun around, but I couldn't see who said it. Daniel climbed the steps to the stage and stopped a few feet away. Up close, he looked ordinary, hair graying, a tired face, skin a little sunburned. He wasn't glowing, he wasn't floating. And yet, somehow, I couldn't look away. He said quietly, "Maybe you should listen before you talk." The audience gasped, but not from fear. It sounded more like relief, like someone had just spoken aloud what they all felt. I said, "You want the mic? Take it. Let's see if you can preach your miracle into ratings." I shoved the microphone toward him, but he didn't take it. He just looked at me, calm as a man watching a storm pass. "You don't need a microphone to tell the truth," he said. "It would cost me more than money." I felt something in my chest shift, like a wall cracking from inside. I wanted to laugh him off again, but nothing came out. Instead, I whispered, "Who are you?" He said, "Someone who remembers what you forgot." I didn't know what that meant. "Forgot what?" I asked. He stepped closer, and I could smell cedar and something faintly like rain on his jacket. "Who gave you your voice?" he said. That one hurt more than it should have. I took a breath and said, "You think you can psychoanalyze me on live TV? I've spent my life debating presidents, priests, and philosophers. You're not going to win with poetry." Daniel smiled a little. "You've spent your life debating shadows. Maybe it's time you talk to the light." Someone behind me heard everything. I turned to see Carla near the edge of the curtain, hands over her mouth. She looked like she'd just seen a ghost. The audience was utterly still. No phones now, no laughter, no side whispers. Just breathing, collective and uneven. I pointed at Daniel. "You think you're better than everyone here? That you can just walk in and play prophet?" He shook his head. "I think you're scared." I laughed, or tried to. "Of what?" "Of being seen," he said. And the moment he said it, I swear something inside me cracked open. Because the truth was, I was terrified of being seen. Every speech, every headline, every flashy interview had been armor. Without it, I didn't even know who I was. Daniel said, "You built a life on proving a point no one asked you to prove." I wanted to shout back, to defend myself, to say that my whole career had been about reason and freedom and progress. But I couldn't. Every excuse felt cheap. Then, the lights above us began to flicker again. One bulb popped with a soft snap, and the rest dimmed to a warm gold. It wasn't darkness, it was gentler than that, like candlelight. Daniel turned to the crowd. "You came here for a debate," he said. "You'll leave with a choice." He looked back at me. "You too." My mouth was dry. "What choice?" he said. "You can keep fighting what you don't understand, or you can remember what you once believed." I told myself it was emotional manipulation. I told myself it was coincidence, lighting errors, stage heat. But deep down, I knew something real was happening. I thought I could still walk away. I wasn't even close. The Bible on the podium fell open on its own. The pages fluttered like a breeze had touched them, though the air was still. When they stopped moving, My eyes landed on a verse I hadn't read in decades. Matthew 12:36. Every idle word that men shall speak, they shall give account thereof in the day of judgment. My hands started shaking. I closed the book and whispered, "That's coincidence," Daniel said softly. "You've built your whole life on coincidence. Maybe that's why nothing ever feels like enough." I wanted to tell him to stop, to shut up, to go back wherever he'd come from. But I couldn't. I felt stripped bare, like he was speaking every thought I'd buried since Claire died. He said, "You think God ignored you, but he never stopped listening. You did." That broke me. I turned away from the crowd so they wouldn't see my face. He said one more thing before he left the stage. Truth doesn't shout, it waits. And just like that, he was gone. Walked down the same aisle he'd come from. No one stopped him. No one dared to. The doors opened on their own. A flood of white light filled the hall. And then he was gone. The moderator stammered something into his mic, trying to regain order, but it didn't matter. The audience started clapping, slowly, reverently, like they'd just come from church. Some were crying. A few fell to their knees. I stood there, motionless, with the Bible still open in front of me. For the first time in my adult life, I didn't feel like a leader or a skeptic or a senator. I just felt small, and somehow safe in that smallness. That night changed everything. I didn't know it yet, but the walls I'd built around myself had started to crumble. And once they began to fall, there was no stopping them. When I got home that night, the city outside my window looked like it had stopped breathing. The streets were wet from a short rain, lights blinking red and gold in the puddles, and I remember standing there in the dark, my suit still smelling faintly of the stage, metal, sweat, and that old sweet trace of paper smoke from the Bible I'd almost burned. I poured myself a drink I didn't want, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at the blank TV screen like it might explain what I'd seen. It didn't. Nothing could. I thought silence would help me forget. I wasn't even close. Every sound in the apartment felt louder that night. The hum of the refrigerator, the click of the clock over the stove, the faint hiss from the heating vent. I kept thinking about Daniel, his calm voice, that steady look that had gone straight through my arrogance like glass through water. I couldn't get rid of it. It was the same look Claire had given me the night she asked me to pray with her. That's what broke me most. At 2 a.m, I finally turned on the television. Every channel was replaying the same 6 minutes. Me, the lighter, the man in the brown jacket, and the lights dimming. Some called it a miracle, some a hoax. I watched myself try to joke it off, watch the cameras zoom in on my trembling hands. The man I saw on that screen looked smaller than I remembered being. The phone started buzzing nonstop. Reporters, aides, donors. Carla's name flashed over and over. I didn't pick up. I just stared at it until the battery died. By dawn, I was still sitting there. The Bible I'd taken from the debate was on the table beside the glass. I hadn't realized until then that I'd brought it home. I opened it, half hoping to prove to myself there was nothing special about it, and that's when I saw her handwriting. Faint pencil marks in the margins from years ago. I recognized her neat, careful letters. Forgive him, Lord, even if he never believes again. I kept one thing to myself. 10 o'clock came with a light rain that made the street shine like slate, and she showed up in a navy coat, hair in a knot, no camera crew dragging wires behind her, just a notebook and the sort of tired eyes you see on nurses at the end of a shift. I made coffee that tasted like cardboard. We sat at the little table by the window, the Bible between us the way a third person sits at certain meals, and she said, "I lost my brother in Kandahar. I prayed like a child. When he didn't come home, faith broke in my hands. Last night I watched you on a tiny screen in a quiet kitchen, and I started crying before I knew why. So I'm not here for proof. I want to know if you're telling the truth." I told her I didn't know what to call what happened, only that every word I tried to say after it felt wrong in my mouth, and she didn't write that down. She just nodded like it matched something she'd already decided to keep. Someone behind me heard everything. Carla had let herself in halfway through and stood in the doorway, arms crossed over a manila folder, watching me talk like I was learning a new language in front of her. When Laura left, she shut the door soft and said, "That woman isn't here to hurt you, Mark, but the others will be, and they need words before noon. She spread the folder on the counter, drafts, options, hedged phrases, and my stomach turned at every one of them. I tried the first paragraph out loud and heard a man I wouldn't trust. I tried the second and wanted to throw the paper in the sink and let the tap shred it. That was not the hard part. The hard part was stepping outside. Cameras waited down the block, polite at a distance because the building has rules, less polite in the questions they pitched across the rain, people who'd cheered me last month now, hungry for a soundbite they could pin to a wall. A man in a delivery van slowed and leaned out to say, "You got what you deserved." And a woman with a grocery cart stopped and touched my coat sleeve and whispered, "Don't harden your heart." And the contradiction of that, contempt and mercy in the space of 12 seconds, made my chest feel like someone had put a fist in it and squeezed. I walked, and the rain turned to a fine mist that smelled like wet copper off the statues on Pennsylvania, and I knew if I went to my office I would hide behind doors and schedules until the feeling died. So I turned toward the places I'd avoided since I started running my mouth about faith. I almost turned back. The first place was a shelter on 2nd Street NE, where my staff had sent Christmas checks with my name on them for years. You know, the kind, bright fluorescent hallway, linoleum that's been mopped to a dull shine, a corkboard full of rules, and a smaller one full of faces who'd gone missing from the coffee line. I asked for the director and got a woman in a gray hoodie with paint flecks on her sleeves who told me, "We're between directors again, so it's me this week, Senator." And when I asked if a man had come through the last 2 nights, 50s, brown jacket, voice like a level Double Fine center, she blinked and said, "We don't take names, but we had a guy like that yesterday. Fixed the back door without a word, smelled like cedar and rain." She said it like that smell was a fact on a chart. Why was that smell there at all? I followed it in my head across places I'd ignored. A church basement on K Street where a volunteer with prison tattoos on his knuckles told me, "Dude showed up, restrung the busted hymn board, left a 20 under the coffee can, told me to look after the kid in the beanie who sits by the heater." And a clinic near Union Market where a nurse, tired and kind, said, "He held a man's hand through a panic attack, didn't say a word, then wiped down chairs like he worked here." And each time there was the same small detail tacked at the end like a signature. He smelled like wood smoke and rain. He thanked people who don't get thanked. He left before anyone could make a fuss. I kept moving because that was the only way to keep my head clear, and because every stop made a little more room in a part of me I had boarded up. He said 5 words. It wasn't Daniel that time. It was a custodian in the Hamilton Civic Auditorium when I went back that night, because I couldn't stand my kitchen or the noise in my own brain, the hall empty and smelling like dust and the sweet chemical tang of extinguishers, the stage dark except for the aisle lights, and the man pushing a mop looked up at me and said, "You left something behind." He pointed to the lectern. I climbed the steps and found a folded scrap of paper under the lip where you rest your hands. I opened it. Stop performing. Start listening. The letters neat, patient, no signature. I ran my fingers over the groove the pen had left in the paper, like I could feel the intention in the strokes. I was not ready to agree. Not to the world, not in a press conference, not even to Carla, who met me on the sidewalk with a legal pad full of lists and a plea in her face. Say you regret the scene. Say you were trying to spark debate. Say anything we can sell. And I said, "I can't sell it if I don't believe it." And she said, "Believe it later. Say it now." And I shook my head and watched her anger turn into something like grief, because she has carried me farther than I earned, and she knew I was about to make her job harder than it had to be. It would cost me more than money. I skipped the networks. I passed on the Sunday shows. I went to a basement church on M Street where the line for the soup stretched past the steps and down the block, because the rain had turned cold, and people without coats always picked the places with steam coming out of the doors. I asked the woman with the ladle where she needed hands, and she said, "You can chop onions if you don't mind crying in public." And I did, at a metal table that wobbled, next to a kid with a scar that ran from his ear to his jaw, who told me he'd been sleeping under the bridge by the ballpark because the cots made his back hurt. "You the senator?" he asked, and when I said yes, he said, "You could pass for a guy who just got tired." And I laughed because he had said it better than all the op-eds had tried to. We fed 200 that night, maybe more, Steam curling off trays, bread heels disappearing, the room loud the way rooms full of relief are loud. That's when the heater stopped clicking. It was such a small thing, the old unit on the wall cycling off, and the quiet that followed made me hear the sound of spoons knocking the sides of bowls, the little thank yous spoken to no one in particular, the scrape of chair legs on linoleum, the shuffle of wet shoes, and I felt my shoulders drop a half-inch like a rope had slackened somewhere inside me. A man with an army cap took my hand and said, "I knew your wife. She prayed with my mother once at Georgetown when they were both getting chemo. Your wife loved loud." And I went into the dry storage room and stood with my forehead against a shelf of Saul-to-Paul tin cans and breathed in metal and cardboard until I could go back out without my face betraying me. Listen to how small it was. A volunteer handed me a box of plastic forks and said, "We're short on napkins. Make them stretch." And it shouldn't have mattered, but it did, because the old me would have called a staffer and had a pallet at the door for a photo by morning, and the man with onion hands and a damp shirt, I had become counted napkins into sets of 2 and slid them along the table like he was making little offerings. When the line was finished and the trays were empty, I wiped the table, and the kid with the scar said, "You missed a spot." And I went back and got that spot, and he grinned like he had taught me something worth knowing. I had 13 minutes to decide. Not about faith in the big capital letter sense, not about resigning, not about speeches, about whether I would meet Laura the next morning like I'd promised, or run again into the anonymity of service where no one asked me to say anything out loud. I walked home along M Street, the rain now a mist that made the storefronts smear into impressionist strokes, the city smelling like wet stone and traffic. And when I reached my building, there was another folded paper in the vestibule. Same neat hand, same patient pressure. Go to the places she can't. I stood under the fluorescent buzz and read it twice, and then I knew what next was, not because a voice told me, but because it made sense in the way a door makes sense when your hand finally finds the right key. I answered on the first ring. It was Laura at 6:30, already moving, already booking a train. "I think he's working," she said without hello. Not preaching, not showing off, working. A rehab on the hill says an unregistered man in a brown jacket fixed their busted window. A parish in Brooklyn says someone left cash with no name and a note that said, "For the woman in the blue sweater near the back." A night shift nurse at Whittier told me a quiet man sat with a janitor whose son got picked up on a bad warrant and didn't have anyone to wait with. "If you're willing, Senator, we can split the list." I said yes before I remembered I was supposed to clear my day with people who schedule my breathing. Someone behind me heard everything. My neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez, who lives alone and waters her plants at odd hours, stood in the hallway with a grocery bag, listening without pretending not to, and when I hung up, she said, "You were loud on television. Maybe you be quiet in person now." And she handed me a bunch of mint from a pot she keeps under the kitchen light and said, "Put in your tea. Helps the stomach." I took the mint and the smell shot straight back to some kitchen from childhood where a woman I can't picture put leaves in a mug and told me to blow on it until the steam didn't sting. This is the part I remember. Not the doorways or the names or the way the light fell in the atrium of the rehab when I held the window while a kid with a crooked ladder sunk a screw into rotten wood. Not the way the nun in Brooklyn said, "He blessed us by leaving." Nor the way the janitor at the hospital told me the quiet man had whistled an old hymn that my grandmother used to hum while she shellacked furniture. Not the ledger at the shelter where someone had penciled in anonymous next to a donation and drawn a tiny fish like people do when they don't want to write the obvious thing. What I remember is the way my chest stopped hurting for a handful of seconds at a time when I just did what was in front of me and stopped trying to be the man who explains everything. By the end of the week, I was tired in a way I can respect. Socks damp from alley puddles, wrists smelling like bleach from wiping tables, onion in my cuticles, the city's noise softened by the simple act of choosing to hear other people first. And still I hadn't seen him, not in a doorway, not across a street, not even the back of a brown jacket vanishing into a crowd. But everywhere I went, the same report trailed behind like a refrain. He was kind, he said little, he smelled like wood smoke and rain. And each telling made me less interested in naming what happened on that stage, and more interested in not losing whatever had started working in me since. At home, that night, another folded note waited inside the Bible's cover. I didn't see how it could have gotten there and decided not to chase that question down the hole because the message was the only thing that mattered. Keep walking. I lay the paper flat on the table, fingers on the crease, and felt that small command settle in the same place the relief had found earlier under the soup kitchen heater. Not a blast of certainty, not an argument won, just a lining up of a few pieces that had sat crooked for too long. And when I closed my eyes, I saw him the way I had wanted to see him from the start, not as a threat to my reputation or a puzzle to solve, but as a man who walked into a mean, bright room and told me, without raising his voice, to stop performing and start listening. And I'll tell you the truth. Because you asked and because you're my friend, I felt grateful, not because he embarrassed me, though he did, but because he handed me back something I threw away when I thought it was safer to be angry than to be honest. And when the heater clicked back on in the middle of the night, I smiled in the dark because for the first time in years, the sound didn't mean the room was empty. It meant something small and steady was working like it should. A year passed before I could tell the story without my hands trembling. Even now, when I talk about it, I can still smell that night in D.C. The metallic scent of rain on iron railings, the faint echo of traffic rolling down Constitution Avenue, and that strange, almost living quiet that follows a public downfall. I was no longer the man with cameras chasing me. No headlines, no interviews, no bright studio lights. Just me, a small rented house in Virginia, and the sound of wind moving through pine trees like slow, steady breath. I thought disappearing would mean healing. I wasn't even close. Every morning I woke up before dawn and made the same black coffee, always 2 sugars because that's how Claire used to take it. I'd sit at the little table near the window and read a few verses from her Bible. I'd stopped trying to explain the miracle, if that's what it was, and started trying to live in a way that didn't mock it. Some days that was easier than others. The news still called sometimes, invitations, requests, ambushes. I stopped answering. Carla eventually left politics altogether. She teaches communications at a small college now. She wrote me once, a short email. You did the right thing, even if nobody understood it. I stared at that line for a long time. Then, one Sunday morning in late spring, I got a letter. No return address. Inside was a single line written in the same patient handwriting I'd seen before. Keep walking. That was all. No name, no signature. Just those 2 words. Why was that message there again? I folded it and slipped it into the back of Claire's Bible. I figured I'd already followed that advice once, but something in me knew I hadn't finished yet. That same week, I started volunteering at a small veterans rehab center outside Arlington. At first, I just fixed things, chairs, door hinges, broken light switches. I didn't talk much. I didn't want anyone to ask questions about who I used to be. It took about a month before one of the guys, a quiet Marine named Joseph, figured it out. He came up to me while I was changing a light bulb and said, "You're that senator, right? The one who mocked God on TV?" I froze with the bulb in my hand. Then he smiled, soft, not cruel. "Don't worry," he said. "I did worse before he got to me." That was the first time in years someone mentioned God and I didn't feel like running. I thought I'd been helping those men. I was wrong. They were helping me. They were showing me what humility actually looks like. One night after closing, Joseph asked if I still believed in miracles. I told him I wasn't sure what to call what happened. He nodded and said, "Names don't matter much, only what it does to you afterward." That line stuck. Still does. Months went by and life started to feel ordinary again. Work, coffee, quiet. Until one afternoon, the director of the center ran in waving a tablet. "You need to see this," she said. It was a short video from a parish in Indiana. A man in a brown jacket was standing at the edge of a crowd during a flood relief effort, passing out blankets, praying softly with strangers. The camera zoomed, but his face stayed partly hidden. Still, I knew. I didn't know how, but I knew. It would cost me more than money. That night, I drove 7 hours straight. Rain streaked the windshield in silver threads. Every mile closer to Indiana, the air felt heavier, like the road itself remembered what I'd done. I reached the parish by dawn. They said the man in the jacket had left before sunrise, after helping stack the last of the sandbags. He hadn't said goodbye, but he'd left something behind. His jacket. Brown canvas worn at the elbows, faintly smelling of cedar and rain. I kept one thing to myself. Inside the jacket's pocket was a folded paper. It wasn't long, just a single verse written in pencil. Blessed are those who have not seen, and yet have believed. John 20:29. I sat in the pew holding that note, and for the first time in decades I prayed, not to be proven right, not to be rescued from guilt, but simply to understand why mercy chooses the people it does. I stayed there until the sun came through the stained glass windows. Then I left the jacket on the altar. It didn't feel like mine to keep. On the drive back, I thought about how many people I'd hurt with my pride, how many I'd dismissed, mocked, silenced, and I realized something simple. Faith isn't proof. It's posture. It's the way you face the storm even when you can't see the horizon. This is the part I remember. Standing outside that little Indiana church, the bell tolling above me, the rain turning light again, I felt Claire beside me somehow, her hand in mine, her voice saying softly, "Now you see." I looked up and whispered, "I do." Today I'm not in office anymore. I don't miss it. I work quietly, mostly with shelters and rehab centers, trying to give back what arrogance once stole. Reporters still ask about that night sometimes. I just smile and say, it wasn't a debate, it was a lesson. And when people ask what I think of the man who stopped me, Daniel, the one who said truth doesn't shout, I tell them this. I think he was the kind of messenger who shows up when we're too lost to save face. Maybe angel, maybe man, maybe both. But I know this. He walked into my darkness, and when he left, the light stayed. So if you're listening to this right now, maybe feeling like your own faith's run dry, remember this. Sometimes grace doesn't arrive with thunder. Sometimes it walks in wearing a brown jacket and leaves before sunrise. If this story touched you, take a second to like this video. It helps us reach more people who might need hope tonight. Comment below where you're watching from, and tell me if you've ever seen a moment like this in your own life. And if you believe faith can still change the hardest hearts, share this story with someone who's lost theirs. Thank you for listening. God bless you.